Thank you. It's wonderful to be here this morning. Thank you for having me. And I don't know if Patricia's here, but she was emailing me back and forth. So hi, Patricia, if you're on Zoom. Also, hi to Kelly, because Kelly's the one who gave me the introduction. So Kelly, you're on Zoom. Hi. And I think Nancy said hello too. So before I get into the issues and challenges that are facing the community, I thought maybe I'd tell you a little bit more about myself and how I came to be, sort of, right? So I did come out or transition back in 2018. That's just 3 short years ago. So I'm at that time I was 56. I'm 59 right now. I was born into a family of 6 kids. At that time, there were 5 boys and 1 girl. Now there are only 4 boys and 2 girls. The first 4 of us were only 5 years apart. Mom and Dad were quite busy. So, but growing up, I thought I'd talk about this because growing up, I was talking to, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Yeah, I was talking to him before. And the questions always go, did you feel this when you were young? And yeah, I did. I did at one time or a few times, but in particular when I was 8, I had a wonderful next door neighbor who I'm still friends with. She moved away to Connecticut. Her name is Mindy and her friend Randy. But my sister, my younger sister, was a brownie. I don't know if people remember brownies, right? Part of the Girl Scouts. So luckily for me, I was 3 years older, but I was very tiny. Not any longer, but back then I was very small. Small as a child. I grew after. So my friend Mindy and I talked, and she thought it'd be great if for Halloween I went out as a brownie. And back in those days, some women wore wigs, and my mom did. So I was very fortunate, right? Mom had a wig, so there I was. So I went out, I had the time of my life, and I just couldn't get over it. I think I was about 8. I came back, I talked to my mother, and my mother looked at me and she said, you better get that off before your father comes home. He'll kill you. So I essentially took it off. I tried to explain to her how I felt, but that really didn't go elsewhere. Subsequent through the years of my adolescence, there were times where I felt these feminine feelings as a young person. But for the most part, I suppressed them, and I went on with a lot of other things that were going on as a adolescent person who's a member of a family where there's 6 kids, and it was quite chaotic living home at that time. And my parents did the best as they could. That's what I always like to tell people. My father was served over in Korea, and I believe he had post-traumatic syndrome. He didn't know that he did, but he was quite violent at times and also mentally abusive, unfortunately. But later in life, we really came back together, and that was a great thing. But I was really dealing with a lot. But back then, there was no terminology. There wasn't even a word transgender, right? Was no word. And now, today, things are so much different. But anyway, after that, when I was 19, I met my sweetheart. She was 17. We went to the same high school. I did not know her. I met her in a place in Island Park, a bar called Speeds. And we dated for 8 years, and then we got married. She was a cis, as we call cis means biological, so she was a cis woman. We were married for, I think, about 30 years. And we have a daughter. She's 22 now. And we got divorced. I asked for the divorce, but we didn't get divorced because of my gender identity issues, because at that time, frankly, I still didn't even know I had a gender identity issue. Although I was doing things with it, but I just didn't understand it. I was working with a therapist at the time, but I really didn't think that I was transgender. And again, a lot of those words weren't available. But even after I got married, but anyway, so I was married. I had I would say I had a happy, pretty happy life as a male. I wasn't unhappy, as you hear. I didn't hate my body. I love my body. In fact, I did something that some males do, like Caitlyn Jenner, for example. They masculinized, meaning that I was working out like crazy just to sort of build the shell around who I really felt like inside, who I really felt like inside. And finally, I decided to go to a therapist. And the first therapist I went to essentially told me that I needed to go home and tell my wife everything. And I was shocked. I was frightened. And I absolutely loved my wife. And I had no intention of going home and telling her something like that because I wasn't really sure after one meeting how I really felt. I really didn't know how I felt. So I left that therapist and found one a few years later. And honestly, I've been working with her ever since. I've had the same therapist for 25 years. That might sound a little odd, but she's a wonderful person. She practices modern psychoanalysis. But I would say she's a humanist also, and she studies astrology as well. So she's a wonderful person. But anyway, in 2018, it was probably more like 2017. What was happening was throughout that time from 19 to 55, I was doing something called cross-dressing. You might have heard of the word. Back in those days, they would call cross-dressers transvestites. I looked at it like some guys like to bowl. I'd like to put on women's clothing. And I found a group of men that like to do that. And there are groups of men that like to do that still. And I went to a conference. There are conferences in Pennsylvania and Boston. And I got to know people. And it turned out, I figured out I wasn't crazy, right? So when I earned my degree in 2014, which is a PhD in organizational psychology, my dissertation was on gender, not on transgender, on gender. It was perceptions of role conflict and workplace stress in women working in male-dominated professions. My ex-wife worked in Wall Street, and I worked at a major plumbing brand called American Standard. You might have heard of it. And our CEO, he hired 3 women in positions of power, and I was shocked at how people reacted to that, both male and female. And I decided between my wife and seeing what she was going through on Wall Street and gender, kind of what I was feeling inside, just about gender overall. I never really kind of understood why we sort of have to fall into specific roles, right, as gender. So that's what I did my dissertation on. Fast forward in 2017, I woke up May 1st, it was, you remember these days, May 1st, 2017, and I was having a lot of issues controlling the message. What that meant was I was privately cross-dressing, but it was starting to bleed into how I dressed every day. And that was getting me very anxious, and I was very concerned. So on May 1st, 2017, I woke up on a Saturday morning. That time I was divorced already. I was divorced for about 6 years. My daughter was living with me. She was upstairs. And I had my little oasis, which was my bedroom. And my oasis was the most feminine place I could be in. And it was a place where I could really be me. And that morning I woke up and I said, you know what? I can't live like this anymore. I cannot live 2 lives. I can't do it. It was destroying me. I just, it was just impossible. So I wrote to my analyst, big bullet point, like I had to prove something to her as if she didn't already know this. But a good analyst will never really tell you, right? You got to figure it out for yourself. So I wrote to her, and when I wrote at the very end, I said, I think I may regret this. And the reason I wrote I might regret this is because I knew that she knew already, and once I put this out there, she wasn't going to let me off the hook. So she didn't let me off the hook, thankfully. And here I am. So after that, I'm just going to talk to life now. I had the conference, and the reason I had the conference was that's where I met people. So I wanted to give back. I thought to myself, the best way I could give back is to have something in New York City. It's never been done before. There's never been a 3-day conference. So I did it. It was fabulous. But the most fabulous part was there was a man who wasn't dressed at all, who came up to me in the vendor place, actually people who were working and said, he wants to speak to you. And he said to me, he said, you know, I've been waiting 30 years for a conference to be in New York City. And he said, and I'm here now, and this is so wonderful. And I said, well, you're going to stay? And he said, well, no, you know, I can't. He said, I have to buy a ticket. I said, well, you could be my guest. I'd love for you to stay. And he said, you know what? He said, this is so great just being here for this hour. He goes, that's enough. And for me, I have to tell you, I spent my life savings and more on having this conference. But it's that kind of getting back, you know, that really meant so much to me. So anyway, from that conference, I had a meetup group, and people were joining it. There was this woman, her name was Nancy. And I wrote to her and I said, nice to meet you. You know, it'd be nice to get together one day. She was a transgender woman. We got together and had actually lunch right over here in Garden City at the Cuban restaurant by the mall. I can't remember. Anyway, Nancy and I hung around one night, one day, then the next day. Then on the third day, and I've never been with a transgender woman in my life, things changed. And fast forward to today, Nancy and I got married about 3 months ago. So, and we just had our wedding reception a month ago. We got married up in Vermont because it was too complicated here in New York. Coming out, and this goes to some of the issues and challenges. Coming out at 56 years old presents its own problems and issues. I'll talk about youth also because that's a big topic today. But as somebody who lived as a male for 56 years to tell the world that you're no longer male, in a world that is binary, in a world that is generally sexist, is the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. But it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life. And I had my share of ups and downs throughout, but all in all, I can't believe where I am. And you had mentioned the universe before, and I like to say that for 5 years before I decided to come out, I fought this like hell, okay? But when the universe wants you to do something, guess what? You're going to do it, okay? So I went dragging, but that's what happened. So Nancy and I got married, but coming out, the most important person was my daughter. I didn't want to lose her. I didn't lose her. She was fantastic. My family, well, you win some, you lose some. And that was hard to take when I first decided to come out. The most important thing was acceptance. I just wanted everybody I knew to accept me. And it was devastating when people wouldn't. And I had to learn that, right? I had to learn that I have to let go, and not everybody will stay in your life, right? And that I could be with people I enjoy and people who enjoy me. When we had our wedding party, we had 26 really lovely people. 2 of my brothers I did not invite. I'm not even sure if they know I didn't invite them. I'm going to see them at Christmas at my other brother's house. So we'll see how that all goes. But telling people about this is hard, but I had some really great friends and they really supported me. So let's talk about some of the issues and challenges of trans people. So you'll hear about bathrooms, right? Bathrooms seems to be a big topic. We hear about bathrooms all the time. And I would call that sort of a micro problem, right? We hear about sports, right? In the news, particularly with trans women. Trans women in sports going to win all those competitions, right? Ruining women's sports, right? That's another micro issue. Here are the 2 big ones. The first one is Transgender Day of Remembrance that just passed. 35 people in the United States were murdered. 375 people around the world. 35 people may not sound like a lot, but our community is only representative of 2 million people. So it's a tremendous amount. And if that's not awful enough, here's one that you probably never hear. And it has a lot to do with love and acceptance, okay? The transgender community, 40% of the people in the transgender community at some point in their life will think about attempting suicide. Okay, 40%. That's compared to about 8% of the population. And yet, it's never talked about, right? And I think that everyone here, if you think that's shocking, it is. And it really does come down to those two items. And I'm really taking all the issues and putting it into two, right? And I'll talk about some of the issues. But it really does come to a lack of love and acceptance. And the acceptance is all around a lack of education. People are not educated. People don't know. That's why I'm so happy to come here today, right? Not everybody in here in this room knows somebody who's trans or non-binary or non-conforming. People don't, or gender expansive. And by the way, it looks like everybody's close to my age, right? Somewhere around. Those words are changing every day. Okay, the younger generation, they have words that I don't even know yet. Okay, and they're coming like a freight train. They're not like me and my generation where we didn't have a word. We didn't even have the internet. We didn't have the internet until the 80s, right? I think. Had a cable box. Remember the cable boxes? So these kids have a phone in their hand. They have all kinds of information all the time. So at Trans New York, I do counseling. So I generally work with clients anywhere from 18 to 75. I would tell you that most of our clients are probably in their 20s. The other thing that's kind of interesting about my work is that 75% of my clients are female to male versus male to female. I think that most people, when they think about transgender individuals, they think about male to female. Again, we live in a sexist society. I always say, so even as a woman who's transitioning to male, she still can't get respect, right? Still can't get acknowledged, still can't get noticed. But I speak to parents all the time. I'm a parent. My daughter has social anxiety. My daughter has depression. You're not listening. She's not on this call. But she doesn't mind me talking about it. But the point is, as a parent, I get how a parent feels, right? And what we have going on across the country, I don't know if you know this. I was mentioning before to somebody, but there are states that are enacting laws preventing. Okay, so you're a parent. Picture this. They're preventing parents from making a decision and a doctor. You can be brought up on charges as a parent if you have a teen who wants to go on hormone blockers or wants to go on hormones, okay? And the very idea that these decisions somehow are being driven just from the kid is the most ludicrous idea I've ever heard in my life. And I'll tell you why. I've been through it myself. It's complete anguish for any trans person to sit and talk to somebody and try and convince them how they feel. Okay, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. These folks, if it's a teen, that teen is with their parent. They're trying to navigate in the best possible way they can. And it's confusing for the parent. It's confusing for the kid. But you know what? Unlike when all of us were young, at least they're coming to their parent and talking to them. And at least their parents available to listen, right? I mean, at some level, we should give those parents a chance, right? Think about that. Think about you being a parent in another state or your grandparent, right? In another state, and your child or your grandchild child has an identity issue, right? And it really comes to be, and you're convinced, okay, as well. And convincing it's a terrible word that I have to use because as a transgender person, I don't know why I have to convince anybody, right? And I really do get tired of convincing people. And I don't have to do it anymore, thankfully. I'm in a loving relationship. My life is wonderful, but I have to tell everybody, I'm not the norm. First of all, I don't know if you noticed, but I'm white, okay? Second of all, I'm middle class. Most people in our community are quite marginalized, okay? They're quite marginalized. Most of them are homeless. Most people don't know this, right? And as I said, getting back to teens and parents, really, I think all we really want, right, is a chance for people to listen. I think to block out somebody from having access to healthcare is completely outrageous. You know, I was saying before, I teach sociology and I just showed a movie. I can't remember who the man was. He was a TEDx talk. And he was talking about parenting. And he showed an analogy with ducks. And the mama duck in front and the ducks following. And then an elephant in the next one where the calf is in front and the mother's behind, right? So he was saying that, you know, in America now, you know, we've come to a more collaboration. Now, some people take that as the child is driving the decisions. No, it's now a collaboration, right? I mean, kids are exposed, and I'm not suggesting that, you know, a 9-year-old knows everything or a 12-year-old knows everything, but kids are exposed at a young age. They're not like we were. I mean, we were not exposed to anything. Think about the web, what they're exposed to every single day, right? They have information at their fingertips. Are you going to deny that information? Can you deny that information? And they're only going to get it younger and younger. So what's wrong with collaboration with parents, right? And at some level, it's really wrong to prevent healthcare. I mean, I would be outraged. My daughter's not trans. How would I feel if my daughter was trans? It's a great question. I don't know. I don't know if she was 13, how I would feel. I'd love to sit up here and tell you, I'd be, you know, doing cartwheels. I'm not really sure how I would feel. I'd be worried. I'm a parent. That's what a parent does. Be worried. Tell my daughter at 22. She said, you have to stop worrying about me. I said, I will. When they throw dirt on me, that's when I'll stop worrying. But that's what parents do. So getting back to what else we do at Trans New York, we do corporate training. And corporate training is very important because education, right? Education sows the seeds to acceptance. So we've got to get people educated. But I also am mindful, right, that there's only 2 million of us, right? So we need allies. And I can't be angry. And I don't get angry. If somebody misgenders me, I try and talk to them, try and get them to understand, right? If somebody's saying something bad about somebody else who's trans, I try and educate them. And in corporate America, they are now going to be hit with a lot of kids coming in who identify in all different ways. I mean, you know, non-binary, non-conforming, queer, gender fluid, the words will keep coming. And as a corporation, you could really lose the next great person because these kids today, again, their expectations are not the expectations we had, right? They expect that you're going to respect who they are. And if you're not as an organization, guess what? They're not going to come. They're not going to come. So in terms of Transgender Day of Remembrance, I just want to sort of pivot back there too. So I would say that probably about 85 to 90% of those folks who have been murdered in the United States happen to be people of color. Probably 50% or maybe even greater are sex workers. And, you know, the excuse that you hear, right, was the old stereotype where people were tricked, right? The man was tricked. He didn't know that that person was transgender. I have newsflash for everybody. Um, it's sort of like shopping for a car. You don't walk into a Toyota dealer looking for a Mercedes Benz. Okay, so that idea that people are tricked is false. The real idea is that that person who is with that trans woman can't really deal with their own internal feelings about their own masculinity. And that's the reason they turn violent. So it's very sad in that way. The other thing that we're embarking on at Trans New York is a workforce development program. And as I said, most of our community is quite marginalized. You can imagine what it's like. I'm fortunate. I owned a plumbing company for a while. Now I own a nonprofit, so I never had to win on an interview. If I had to go on an interview, I think I'd be pretty nervous. Even coming here, when I got up before, I felt the butterfly, you know? So what we're doing is we're going to run an 8-week cohort, and we're going to pay people to come. We're going to pay them to come because we know that people are frightened. And if they're doing other kinds of work to support themselves, they may not want to give that up. So we're going to pay them to come. And we teamed up with a wonderful organization called the American Management Association. So they are going to do all the wonderful content for us. And this will lead to internships. And hopefully from there, we'll have a job placement program. Because one of the things I learned over the last 3 years at John Jay University while teaching sociology, that there are a lot of social problems that have been around for 50, 60 years. You know, the wars, war on poverty, right? War on drugs, war on terrorism, all of them. So for our community, what we really need is economic empowerment. So it's great to have government help us, and that's just part of the equation, but we have to get corporations to help us as well. We have to get people to help themselves as well. So that's the idea behind the workforce development program.